Let's continue our service now with Seder Kriyat HaTorah, the service for the reading of the Torah. And as is our custom, we're going to begin with a Mishaberach, a prayer for healing. And this has become more and more critical. I'm not going to say more important, but maybe a little more urgent in these times of COVID. And while we are praying for healing, we certainly want to keep in mind all of those within our own Seacrest community, both residents as well as, of course, our cherished employees who are either suffering with or dealing with the isolation of the COVID virus. Many have been uh, testing positive, and we wish them speedy recoveries if they're having symptoms. And if not, we wish them a speedy return to work when they're able to get here. And for those of us who have been fortunate and have remained healthy, thank God, we're certainly all experiencing illnesses of spirit, illnesses of heart, illnesses of emotion. And so for all of us, I offer this Mishaberach. Mishaberach Avotenu ve'imotenu, Avraham, Yitzchak ve'Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Sarah, Rachel ve'Leah, Hu Yevarech et ha-cholim. Our God and God of our ancestors, we ask your blessing on all of these people, all of those whom we hold in our hearts, those who we know are suffering from illness, from spiritual, emotional, and physical illness. We ask that you grant them a refuat ha-nefesh, a refuat haguf, a healing of the spirit and a healing of the body, and that this may be a refuah shlema, a complete healing. And together, let us say, Amen. And we turn to page 63, and let's sing. Mishaberach Avotenu Mekor habracha Limotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Mishaberach imotenu mekor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen. And we continue our service now on page 64 with the Torah reading service, and we're going to do a little bit of the liturgical pieces, even though we're not in front of the ark, even though I don't have a Torah scroll here. We're going to use our imaginations and pretend as best we can. Ein kamocha ve'elohim Adonai, ve'ein kama'asecha, malchutecha malchut, כל עולמים וממשלתך בכל דור ודור. אדוני מלך, אדוני מלך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו ושלום. אב הרחמים, היטיבה ברצונך את ציון, תבנה חומות ירושלים, תבנה חומות ירושלים, כי בך לבד בטחנו, מלך אלרם ונישא, אדון עולמים. And we turn now to page 68. And after a very brief introduction to this Torah portion, we're going to go ahead with our blessings. So this week we are reading from Parshat Mishpatim, and I'm going to be chanting some verses from the very beginning of that Torah portion. And it talks about briefly what happens with the servants that you have. And it is presumed that these servants, slaves, whatever you'd like to call them, they're called servants in our translation, how they are treated and what their rights are in terms of freedom should they decide to go free. So let me chant a little and then I'll come back and talk about this after I chant. So if you would please do the blessing with me, which can be found on page 68, that would be great. Baruch hu et Adonai hamvorach, Baruch Adonai hamvorach leolam va'ed, Baruch Adonai hamvorach leolam va'ed, Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, V'natan lanu et Torato, Baruch ata Adonai Noten HaTorah. Amen. Ve'ele hamishpatim asher tasim lifnehem, ki tikne eved ivri sheshanim ya'avor uvash vit yetze lechofshi chinam im begapo yavo begapo yetze im baal ishahu vayatza ishto imo im adonav yitin lo isha v'yalda lo vanim o vanot ha'isha ve'yaldeha tihiyeh. Sorry about that. I have to find the rest of the Torah portion. Tihiyeh la'adoneha vehu yetzei vegapo ve'im amor yomar ha'eved Hahavti et Adoni et ishti ve'et banav lo etze chofshi vehigisho Adonav el ha-Elohim vehigisho el hadelet o el hamiz zuzah v'ratza Adonav et ozno b'martzea v'avado leolam. Sorry about that split there. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch ata Adonai noten haTorah. Amen. So this first aliyah of our Torah portion is quite interesting because it talks about what happens when a man has slaves. And in this case, we are talking about Hebrew slaves and not the Egyptian slaves that came out of the land of Egypt with the Israelites. So why are there Hebrew slaves? Well, There were certain circumstances, of course, under which there were individuals who could not, for whatever reason, support themselves. And so they became slaves to, or indentured servants to, other Israelites. Very interesting, however, to see the ways in which these Hebrew slaves were treated. And even though they were slaves and considered property of the one who owned them, there were some differences. So the Torah portion which I read this morning, and we have to kind of set the stage here. Moses has now left Egypt with the Israelites. He has had his conversations with his father-in-law Yitro about how he is to divide up the judging responsibilities. And Moses is now beginning to relay some of the mishpatim, the ordinances or the laws, to the children of Israel. And he begins by talking about Hebrew slaves. So you can kind of see what the scene is here. And what Moses is relaying is that if an individual buys a Hebrew slave, that slave is to work for his or her master for a period of 6 years. And in the 7th year, he's going to go out to freedom without any charge. In other words, he doesn't have to buy his freedom. He doesn't have to do anything more to attain the freedom. He simply has to work for his master for a period of 7 years. If he came in alone, in other words, if he came in without a wife, he's going to leave alone. But if he was a married man, his wife is going to go out with him, and any of those children that he had with that wife. So if he comes in as a bachelor, he leaves as a bachelor. If he came in with a wife, he leaves with his wife. However, if he came in as a bachelor and his master gives him a wife during that period of 6 years of servitude, I said 7 years, I mean 6 years of servitude, and if she bears him sons and daughters, the woman and her children now belong to the master. And the slave, the servant, has to leave on his own. So you can see that this is not as simple as it would seem. Many of these Hebrew slaves obviously were young men. Perhaps they were unmarried. Remember, marriage took place at a very, very early age in those days. And marriage was really nothing more than a man saying, I'm taking you as my wife, having marital relations with her, and then they were considered married. So we have a situation in which a young man, possibly at age 12 or 13, comes to a Hebrew master, becomes a servant to them. The master then gives him a wife to marry. He marries her. He has children with her. 6 years later, decides he wants to go. He cannot take that wife with him. So it's kind of a thorny situation. So if the slave says to his master, I love my master, I love my wife, and I love my children, so I'm going to choose to stay. I am not going to go free. And in that case, his master has to bring him to the judges. There, this group of judges that Moses has established who rule on these certain issues. They bring him to the door or the doorpost of his residence, and the master basically pierces his ear with an awl. Now, I don't think an awl is like the little punchy thing that little girls get their ears pierced with. I think an awl is probably a much more, well, you've seen an awl. It's a tool. So the ear is there's a hole bored in it. He is basically, without getting too graphic, taken to the doorpost of the house, to the mezuzah, the lintel, and that all is hammered or bored through his ear into the doorpost as a sign that he is now a servant forever to that master, and he is to serve that master forever. Now, if a man, so servitude was a mixed bag. Obviously, if a young man was young enough to become a servant and didn't have a wife yet, at some point he was going to be given a wife by his master, and that's when the tricky part starts, because if he wants to go, he can't go with her and the children that came as a result of the marriage. If a man sells his daughter, now, by the way, if you were an Israelite, you could also sell your daughter into servitude. You needed the money. We know about situations nowadays where there are cultures that sell their daughters into slavery and servitude, and that was not uncommon in those days. If a man sells his daughter as a maidservant, she shall not go free as other slaves go free. So if I'm the master of a household, I want to sell my daughter into servitude. She does not have that same option to go free after a period of time. If she is displeasing to the guy I sell her to, and that guy has not designated her for himself, in other words, as a wife, then he can enable her to be redeemed. And he is not going to rule over her or sell her to another person, because it is as if he has betrayed her. So he can just let her go free. Now, it's unclear what happens once she goes free, because if she's no longer part of her master's household, meaning he's no longer providing for her financially, does she go back to her father's household and once again become his responsibility? It's unclear. We are assuming that this master has not taken this maidservant for himself. If he has designated her, however, as the wife to one of his sons, he has to deal with her according to the law of the daughters of Israel. In other words, he is required to provide for her. So even if he doesn't like her anymore, even if he redeems her and sets her free, he has to continue to provide for her. If he himself takes another wife, he cannot diminish what he is giving her for sustenance, not her food or her clothing or marital relations. And if he doesn't provide these things, food, clothing, and marital relations, he has to let her go free of charge without any kind of payment to him for letting her go free. Now, this is very interesting. Here is what a husband, according to Mishpatim and this particular verse, must provide to his wife: sustenance, meaning food, clothing, and marital relations. So the marital relations are really in the ownership of the woman. She is the one to whom the marital relations are due, not the husband. His mitzvah, his task, is to procreate, pru urvu milu, to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Hers is to be afforded marital relations. So it's a very interesting dynamic. And if he doesn't do those things for her, she is allowed to go free without anything owed to this man who has taken her as a wife. Now, again, the verse talks about if he takes another wife for himself. So the presumption is, of course, that polygamy was the practice of the day, and that he owed each and every wife the same three things: sustenance, clothing, and marital relations. And if he couldn't provide those to each wife, especially the maidservant who he had taken for himself, he has to let her go free without any penalty. So this is very interesting to note. Sometimes when I read these particular Torah portions, I like to say that was somebody else's side of the family, not my side of the family, because some of these practices are so archaic and anachronistic to how we function today as Jews that it's a little hard for me to understand where they were coming from, but realize that these were practices of the ancient Near East. Now, this afternoon at 1:15, I hope you will come back and join me for Shabbat Chaverim, because there are some really fantastic parts of this Torah portion. They discuss where we got all these laws of kashrut, as well as discussion about possessions and loss of possessions and what you do when you find something. And there's even a section in here upon which Judaism bases its position on abortion. So I hope that you'll join me at 1:15 this afternoon as we continue to explore Mishpatim. So we're going to continue our service now on page 77 with Aleinu, page 77. And actually, before we recite Aleinu, I'd like you to join me in this beautiful poem by Judy Chicago called the Merger Poem. And then all that has divided us will merge. And then compassion will be wedded to power. And then softness will come to a world that is harsh and unkind. And then both men and women will be gentle. And then both men and women will be strong. And then no person will be subject to another's will. And then all will be rich and free and varied. And then the greed of some will give way to the needs of many. And then all will share equally in the earth's abundance. And then all will care for the sick and the weak and the old. And then all will nourish the young. And then all will cherish life's creatures. And then all will live in harmony with one another in the earth. And then everywhere will be called Eden once again. Aleinu, page 77. Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon ha'kol, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד ארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינת עוזו בגובהי מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום והשבותה אל לבבך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד. ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. Please turn to page 80 and join me in this beautiful reading towards the bottom of the page, and it continues at the top of page 81. When I die, if you need to weep, cry for someone walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arm around others and give them what you need to give to me. You can love me most by letting hands touch hands and souls touch souls. You can love me most by sharing your simchas and multiplying your mitzvot. You can love me most by letting me live in your deeds and not on your mind. And when you say Kaddish for me, remember what our tradition teaches. Love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away. And on this Shabbat, we are remembering the following individuals from our community for whom we are still in a period of Shloshim, the first 30 days following their death. We remember Morris Kantrovich. We remember Helene Rotto, Sharon Sweet, Cy Evendorf, and Colin Cameron. And may their memories abide for an eternal blessing as we recite the ancient words of Kaddish Yatom on pages 82 and 83, the Mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, v'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kari v'yimru. Amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mavarach le'olam ulamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yithaleh v'yithalal shemei dekudasha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechamata, da'amiran be'alma v'yimru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chaim. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel v'yimru. Amen. May God, who makes peace in high holy places, bring peace upon us and upon all. And together we say, Amen. So I again want to wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. I can't thank you enough for joining me. I have no way of knowing how many of you are out there. I have no way of knowing how many are watching. We can't keep track. I hope that this service is meaningful to you, to those of you who watch. And if it is, that maybe you will invite one friend in the building to watch with you. Not necessarily in your room, but to also turn on their TV and watch on Saturday morning. A couple of announcements before we do a final song, and that is just to remember to tune in this afternoon at 1:15 for Shabbat Chaverim. It may be shown more than once. I don't know. That is up to Katie Park and her Life Enrichment Department, but I know that it's going to show at least at 1:15 and maybe again. And so please take some time to watch it. I always try to do something interesting, informative. I try to do something that enables me to also learn a little bit, because I like to be able to study something that I don't know about. And so it's new for me as well. And I hope you'll join me. Next week on Wednesday at, I believe, 10:30 in the morning will be another episode of Chai There with Rabbi Leah. We've brought that back again. And then, of course, Shabbat blessings next Friday night, Shabbat services next Saturday morning. And you will have to check your calendar for anything beyond that point. Perhaps by the time I bring you Shabbat Chaverim this afternoon, I'll be able to give you the calendar for the entirety of next week, but I can't remember it off the top of my head right now. But I do know that Wednesday morning there will be Chai There with Rabbi Leah, and of course Shabbat blessings on Friday night and Saturday morning of next week, Shabbat services. So please tune in for everything. I can't thank you enough for joining me. As I said, even though I can't see your faces, you can see mine. It's wonderful not to have to wear a mask and to be able to come to you live this way. And I am looking for our closing song, because I would like to do Adon Olam this morning. So let's sing Adon Olam, and then we'll do our Kiddush and Motzi. Page 84. Adon Olam asher malach b'terem ko yitzir nivra le'ed nasa v'chefso kol azai melech shemo nikra ve'acharei kichlot hakol levado yimloch nora v'hu haya v'hu hoveh Vehu yeh betifara, vehu echad ve'en sheni, lahamshilo lahachbira, beli reishit, beli tachlit, velo ha'oz v'hamizra, vehu eli v'chai goali, v'tzor chevli, Be'et Sahara, vehu nisi umanos li, menat kosi, beyom ekra beyado, af kidruchi, be'et ishan, ve'aira, ve'imruchi, geviati, Adonai li, Velo ira. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen, l'chaim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz b'te'avon. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you back here at 1:15 for Shabbat Chaverim. Have a wonderful morning. Bye-bye.